Okay, so we're going to have a go at testing some radioactive sources now and detecting their radioactivity using this device. This is called a Geiger Muller tube or a GM tube, and it makes a little noise every time it detects some radiation. So what's interesting about it though is if I turn it on, you'll notice that it's making some little beeping noises already. Now that's because it's detecting something called background radiation. We're exposed to quite a lot of background radiation all the time. Most of it comes from the sun, outer space, some of it comes from rocks that are in the ground, not so much here, more in places where there's a lot of granite under the ground. But the point is we're exposed to quite a lot of background radiation all the time. So it makes it very difficult to do experiments because when we're trying to measure the effect of a radioactive source, the background radiation is always getting in the way and muddling it up. And the other thing that's difficult about it, you can hear from how often this is beeping, that it's very random. So sometimes it does a little flurry of a few beeps and then it's quiet again for a while. So to eliminate the effect of background radiation, what we should be doing is turning this on, counting how many counts we get, how many beeps we get in a fixed period of time, say a minute or 5 minutes. And then while we do the experiment, we can subtract the effect of the background radiation that we've already measured. Now, because of this random effect of it, it's really sensible for us to measure background radiation 3 or 4 times and take those counts over a minute or whatever time period we want on 3 or 4 occasions, take an average, and that's what we decide our background radiation measurement is. Now, I'm not going to do that today because I really want to show you the effect of some of the sources and what sorts of materials block the sources and prevent that radiation reaching our GM tube. So I'll join you in a moment when I've got them ready. Okay, so I have in my source holder here a sample of something that is an alpha particle emitter. Now I hope you can hear from how much this is beeping that there's a great deal more radioactivity being detected than there was when I was just detecting the background radiation. What I'd like to do now is to try putting some different materials between my source and the counter and see if we can see if it has any effect. Now, alpha is supposed to be blocked by paper. I don't think it's very good at blocking it, but it's possibly slightly less than it was before. Let's try some other materials. This is a thin piece of aluminium. That seems to have been reasonably effective. Let's try a thicker piece of aluminium. See what I mean? It's hard to judge, isn't it? Let's try a piece of lead. Lead's normally really effective at blocking radiation. That very thin piece of lead has been quite effective. I could try again with a much thicker piece of lead and hope that we get almost no counts at all. Here we are. You may still be getting the odd beat from background radiation, but I think there's quite significantly less and with no material there at all. Okay, I've now got a beta source in place, and you can hear this is making an almost continuous tone. It's detecting so much radiation coming out of this. I'm going to try again with the different materials to see if I can block it. Well, I think the piece of paper made no difference at all. Let's try some thin aluminium. Well, that seems to have slowed it down, but it hasn't stopped it. But that's not too bad. Let's try a thin piece of lead. That's been quite effective as well. Let's try a very thick piece of aluminium. And let's try a really thick piece of lead now. You might like to have a think while I'm doing this about whether you think aluminium or lead is better at blocking the radiation. Okay, so this is the gamma emitter. Now gamma is the most penetrating of all the rays, so it's the most difficult to block. Let's see if we can see that evidence of that using our materials and trying to block it. So we're going to try the paper. Well, I think that's made no difference at all. Let's try a thick piece of aluminium. That doesn't appear to have made much difference. Let's try an even thicker piece of aluminium. Seems to be going straight through. Let's try the lead. So I'm trying a medium to thin piece of lead here. Okay, let's try a thicker piece of lead. It's still going through that by the sounds of things. Let's try our thickest piece of lead. I think it's reduced it a little bit, but not very much at all, and that piece of lead is at least a centimetre thick. Okay, this is another example of a GM tube, only this one gives you a digital readout that provides you with a count. So it's making a little click, and I think every time it detects some radioactivity, you can see the numbers just changed. It's picking up a little bit, but this is the background radiation, and it's very, very low at the moment. It's not even really registering. I think it needs to do around 50 clicks before it even shows anything. What I thought was quite interesting was to put it near these sources. Now the sources that I was using in my other experiment are kept in these boxes to keep them safe. I'm going to take the lid off one of them so that you can see. Inside there's a little lead disc, and the source is in there in a little lead chamber. It's pointing down at the moment, but this is to try to prevent any radioactivity coming out of here and to keep it secure and safe so we can store it in school. But what I thought was quite interesting was the effect when I pointed my GM tube near these. I don't know if you can still hear the clicking. This is the one that contains the alpha sample. Still some very faint clicking, but it's not really any different from background radiation. And you might like to think about how penetrating alpha radiation is and how effective that lead box is inside there, containing the radiation and keeping us safe. This is the beta sample. Now the numbers have been moving a little bit on the screen there, indicating that it's detecting something, and I can hear the clicking is a lot faster. I don't know if it's coming out on the audio channel for you. And finally, I want to show you the gamma source that's in the little lead container as well. And you can see, even though it's in that lead container and is supposed to be protecting us and keeping us safe, quite a lot of radiation is still emerging from that. And so one of the reasons that we have to store these radioactive sources very carefully is to make sure that people who are working in the room where we keep them are going to be protected and safe. So these are kept in a lead-lined cupboard and locked away, and we're very careful about who is allowed to take them out and see them and use them, and the regulations about how you manage them and make sure that you don't point them towards anybody. They're only ever pointed along the desk away from people to keep everybody as safe as we possibly can.